evening. Really, I found quite impressive resumes already among the audience, and I probably will find more. And I have to say that I might embarrass myself tonight by talking about such a large subject. Just one minor correction or adjustment to say that I'm actually not an IP lawyer qualified in Hong Kong, but in the US. So my background is I studied electronics engineering and I studied law, and then I became a lawyer. And I worked in Hong Kong in 2001, did a lot of enforcement work with Baker McKinsey, everybody knows. And I decided to actually move back to the States, which I specialized in the bar of New York and New Jersey. And I did litigation, prosecution, if you know that, what that means in IP subject matter, which means it does not mean we prosecute people, we basically prosecute applications for patents and trademarks and copyrights. And then I actually, before I became a full-blown lawyer, I was a patent licensing manager at Alcatel-Lucent. So that makes me, I guess what you call a full-blown IP person, because I've done licensing, prosecution, litigation, and now in the past 5 years, after I've started up my own IP advisory firm, small group of us specialize in IP asset management, which focus on investment into IP assets and make a good return for the investors. So that's a few words about myself. Without further ado, I may start the subject. If you found any inaccuracies or not so quite updated information, please just point it out and bear with me, because I had the luxury to take a few weeks off, so I only came back this weekend and started preparing this. But that's not to say I prepared this only for a few days. I prepared this for all of my life, as I was working in this subject matter. So how do we maximize IP asset value? There is this word asset. Sometimes people use assets, sometimes use asset. As a lawyer, we kind of, I think, we use IP asset to categorize all assets. But if we want to make it more plural, it suggests that you can grow in quantity. I don't know what accountant would comment on that. But so today, we would have, these are the 5 areas I'd like to discuss. So just as a primer, what are the intellectual property assets and why they can increase the value of a company? And then we go on and talk about the art of startup valuation, which is not a topic I opine on. I would like to slightly touch upon it because it actually leads our topic into the myth of IP asset valuation. And at the end, we will just take a look at how IP assets can boost the value of a company. So what are the IP assets? I think most people would know in this room. If I ask, maybe I can hear who would like to define IP asset. Can I have a show of hands? No? Please.
An invention.
Yes. Maybe not. An invention. Okay. A process.
A solution.
It could be a solution. It could be. All of these things could be IP assets. There is a distinction between IP assets versus intangible assets. So let me point out these circles, then we can define why they are, why they cannot be. Or so IP assets, basically, if you look at IP portfolio, you have first patents. I say patents because I'm a tech person. I focus on lots of technical innovations and protectable by patents. And next one, you have trademarks, which could be the most valuable IP assets in the planet, such as, I think, quite well-known names, you know, P&G, Nestle, which has the largest IP portfolio, just by trademarks. And the next would be copyrights, that we all know the industry of movies or Hollywood or entertainment is run by their copyrights. And the last one would be trade secrets. So significant example of trade secrets is Coca-Cola's formula. It always has been protected as trade secrets. It's never filed as patent protection, but yet it's the most valuable trade secrets until this day. So that's actually qualified as IP portfolio or IP assets, what we call. So what about process, solutions, or inventions? They're only protectable if they are patentable as an invention. They can claim the protection under a jurisdiction of patent law. As a solution or a process could also be patentable process or patentable solution. However, if they cannot be protected by patents, and they have to be protected by one of these forms, such as copyrights, for example, if we have a process that's identified by a series of algorithms, so we call them software code, and these code, you can actually protect them by copyrights in a very identifiable form. So you can claim infringement and you can claim damages. That's what we call IP assets. And there are lots of things happens in our daily life or in a routine business that could also be intangible assets, such as a customer list, such as a recipe, for example, making a good cake. And some of them could fall under IP assets if you can protect them in such kind of form and formats. However, if you can't, it might be categorized as your intangible assets. So we can also think of know-how or technologies. Sometimes they may not be protectable. So I think clearly we want to make sure that our IP assets are identifiable, protectable, and enforceable. So without more dwelling on this one, we move on to the next subject, which is why IP assets can increase the value of a company. So now we kind of get the idea that IP assets are intangibles. But normally a company has tangible assets. That's what we have in a traditional concept. We have buildings, we have machineries, we have, I don't know, land, for example. Lots of manufacturers have huge, they own huge real estate. But nowadays, the intangibles are more and more increasingly important. Why? We'll explain next. But this slide shows that we have two parts of the equation, which is tangibles and intangibles. Why they are more important, the intangibles? Because our technology innovation and information technologies have actually changed the way of doing business, let alone to say changed our life. The intangible assets are increasingly important because more service-oriented industries are rising, and more process and actually manual work are performed by intelligent machines and by algorithms. For example, we used to have trucks, or used to have wagons, or we used to ride horses to deliver a piece of goods. Nowadays, we don't need any human being. We need a small gadget called the drone. So we don't really rely on tangible products or process anymore. Well, that's good or bad. So today we are not discussing the philosophical side of the syndrome. Anyway, so I'm not sure this data is still current, but I knew that at one point during 2000s, 80% of NASDAQ traded companies, 80% of their assets are intangible. So then why IP assets can increase the value? Because, let's see, so S&P 500 companies have 80%, up to 80% are their intellectual assets, and companies with strong and relatively young patent portfolio tend to outperform in the stock market. Albeit to say is the US stock market, but I'm sure it will be happening in China, Singapore, London. I think that's the trend. And obviously this is also because America has the most outperform IP, let's say IP business. They are. That's why I cited these data. And they have 5.5 trillion equivalent to about 45% of GDP. This is actually a data a few years ago. I don't know nowadays, with all the increasing litigation activities and investment activities into IP, this number could only on the rise. So not only the US economy depends on more development of innovations. I think every economy depends on that. Hong Kong, China, mainland, Southeast Asia, every economy depends on the process of creating inventions. It doesn't matter be incremental or drastic or life-changing innovations. So I think we will move on to the third category. Just want to verify. I have up to what time I need to stop? 9. Okay. Sorry, I have lots of time. I guess now we can maybe have an interactive discussion about the art of startup evaluation. How many people in this room are involved in valuation of companies or startups? So maybe I can just have a good what do you think the best method in startup valuation? Or maybe this gentleman first.
In relation to companies with IP, obviously. Not all companies have IP. I mean, as you said, there's intangibles and intellectual capital and what's intellectual assets, which is intellectual property. Your question.
No, my question is in general. What would be the best method you think should be used to evaluate startup? Management. So you would put, let's say, $2 million if you have a good.
I'd say timing.
Yeah.
Timing first, management second, idea third.
Idea third. Okay. Thank you.
Timing being, is this actually relevant now for this time, or is it too far ahead of the curve? Is it actually too late? In fact, Bill Gross did a review of all the. In fact, there's a good TED talk on this. So if you watch it, Bill Gross Idea Lab, and he looked at those 3 areas and looked at all the companies that had been successful he had in his Idea Lab, and those that were expected to be worth. And in fact, he found overwhelmingly that timing was the key, if you like, denominator. The biggest thing. Then management, then the idea. So you have the best idea. If the timing's not right, it's not going to work.
Yeah, right. And what about you?
Well, I mean, to be frank, I don't think there is a general method in terms of valuing a company. be honest, it's too contextual nowadays, and especially given how frequent, especially new companies, especially within a year or two, they change strategy so much that there really is no one way to value a certain type of company, and which is kind of ironic because if you are in the VC space or in the equity space, I mean, you need some methodology, but ultimately it's in the context in which that company operates, and end of the day, it's just what price you're willing to pay, right? And it's unfortunate because you can have as many metrics as you want, and someone will just completely crap on that, and it's just a matter of whether or not you're happy with the price that you're willing to pay. And it's really, there is no one way to do general valuation of a startup, but that's the risk that you take, right?
Yeah. Okay. Who else would like to give their own opinions about this subject before I say something? Well, what I'm going to say is listed there, but nobody. Okay. Well, I guess generally we believe that it's really impossible to value something that you don't know and you don't see, because it's future, right? First thing is, a startup is basically you're thinking about something futuristic. Better put it, maybe in the next 3 years it will take off, or next 5 years, but maybe even worse. That's why I didn't get your name, but the first gentleman said timing is crucial. And then there's also a lot about intangible and abstract. I think a lot of startups. I'm not in the VC space. I work with some VCs for some of the technology companies I represent. I see how they value them, and I see how they analyze these companies. So a lot of them are intangibles because they're abstract. They have a good idea, and sometimes these ideas are patentable, or we protect them by software copyright algorithms. But nevertheless, they're still abstract until you create a prototype and you have to test the prototype in the marketplace. You don't really know. And even you test it for 2 years, maybe the 3rd year it's, collapse. So anyhow, 2 things, intangible and futuristic, makes this subject very hard. But what our job is, I guess, to make this industry thriving and ever thriving, because it's the fuel of our economies, we believe. We have to put it in some sort of a manageable and calculative form. So I believe colleagues from the other side created the formulas such as these. We see method, Berkers, and so on and so forth, and used in Silicon Valley. And sometimes we also do projects relates to investment only in patent assets. Not even the patentable idea becomes a workable institution, meaning that there's no company to operate any products, but we just have a pool of patents. There are many investors that are interested in investing even more futuristic and more abstract. Then how do we value them? How much do you want to pay for 50 patent portfolios? 100 million? 40 million? 2 million? So that's why we create these formulas to help this industry become fluid. I think when it's becoming fluid, there would be a lot of innovations because there will be funding for R&D. So these are the methods on the street, or in Silicon Valley, or in Silicon Alley, or in Hong Kong, Beijing. But I'm not sure if all of them are accurate, obviously. So let's go on to maybe quickly go through them because I know some of the audiences here are already very familiar with them. So that's the first one, the VC method. So they basically put this formula in place. Obviously, it's from this professor from Harvard Business School, and he describes how do you calculate the future ROI, return on investment. And then you need to understand what's terminal value, which is a term of art. I guess it's any assets, it has its value, but you want to know its value when it's ending its life. It's such as we use, sometimes we calculate a licensing contract. So if Intel is licensing its technologies and software and patents rights to another company, let's say AMD, its competitor, it actually calculates a present value for a contract for 10 years. So that's the value you put on. You give a present value of an asset, of its terminal value. So there you get post-money valuation as a factor to be divided. So that's the first method, which is probably very mathematic. We don't have to go into detail today. And the second significant method they use is Berkus. So I think this one would be more interesting to and more obvious to see. So basically it says, if you have anything valuable, we can give you a value on it. Let's say, for example, you have a very sound idea about, let's say, rating companies. And you write a series of algorithms, and you make a software, and you make it very operable, and you have a good product. You can sell your software, you can license them, and companies or users can use. And is that sound? Yes, it's a sound idea because we don't have a good tool to rate companies at the moment, except you go to a company and ask for ratings. Okay, we give you 2 million value, and then do you have a prototype? Is it usable? Can I actually see it? Can it be operated? Okay, good, 2 million. And then team, as this gentleman just said, yes, because then we don't have much risk. And then you have the other things such as sales or strategic relations and so on and so forth. And then it comes up with a value. So that's actually a very easy or more user-friendly way to value a company or to see your own company's value. Third way is the scorecard, which I have not have the intention to go into these 7 characteristics because I think it would be too dry for today's discussion, because we are going to discuss about why IP assets can increase the valuation. Whatever method they use, your IP asset value should always be there. I think that would be the goal.